God is putting this topic, actually, since I woke up this morning, God's been putting this topic on me. It was one of the first things that I wrote down that he was talking to me about. And that is, if healing is contingent on others, you are in big trouble. If your healing is contingent on others, you are in big trouble. You know, I remember thinking when I was a kid that maybe if I got sick or maybe if I was dying or something like that, then my parents would care about me. Maybe then it would change their behavior. Maybe then they would see what they were doing to me. And years later, I got sick to the point of death after my parents died. Of course, they weren't here. And it didn't change anyone's behavior, quite frankly. And it's kind of a good thing that it didn't change anyone's behavior, that I didn't suddenly have a family in my siblings. I mean, the truth is, most people didn't care whether I lived or died. I didn't have anyone in my family calling to see if I was alive, except for my daughter. And I would lay there wondering how it was going to happen. How was it going to happen when I died? What was going to happen with my dogs? Hoping that they would be okay, that someone would know. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because that's a very naive thought, a very young thought that I had, that if something happened to me, then other people would change their behavior. But it was a fantasy that I had as a child, and we often take that fantasy into our adulthood. And we think if they just knew how they were affecting us, if they just knew how much pain I'm in when they do this behavior. You know, that's the mentality of a lot of people who get in relationships with what the world calls addicts and alcoholics. And so they browbeat the addict or alcoholic with what they're doing to the family. Look what you're doing to the children. Look what you're doing to me. And they think that somehow they're going to change that. And they see the remorse of the addict and the alcoholic and they think, okay, maybe this finally got them. Or maybe if I just make things comfortable enough for them, then they'll change. And you know, the bottom line is, it doesn't matter how much contorting and manipulating we do within ourselves, we cannot make people change. Only God can make people change. You want someone to change, you start changing yourself. You start actually changing in God, not manipulating, not harassing and nagging and guilting. You start changing in yourself. When you return to God, when you start fasting and you start praying and you start dealing with your own stuff, then God's going to start working in the lives of those around you. I've told you a million times that when I started healing, my daughter started healing alongside me. And she wasn't even living in my home. And she wasn't even, under the age of 18. Because that seems to be the magic number by which we think that we no longer have responsibility for our children, which is ridiculous. Spiritual responsibility with our children will exist until we die. What we do affects our children. There's no cutoff age. There's no age at which they somehow separate from us spiritually. So if you have children, I don't care what age they are. I don't care if they're in your house or they're adults. It doesn't matter. Or they have their own families or they're now married. You still have responsibility. You still have a way of affecting those children. And when you fast and pray, you're going to move powerfully. When you start breaking curses that are over your family, whether they know it or not, when you start breaking those curses, it's going to have an impact on your family. Your behavior will not save them, but it will have an impact on them. One of the naive, immature thoughts that we have about healing is that someone needs to get it. Some human being needs to get it in order for us to heal. And if our parents refuse to get it, then we go to a therapist and we want them to get it. And we keep trying to explain it to them. And rather than being focused on the things that actually need to change inside of us, we're focused on them taking the onus of responsibility. We're focused on relaying to them so that they understand, and that way they can do what? What are they going to do with it? Some kind of voodoo to break these curses, to break the sin that's going on in your life? What are they going to do? Thankfully, God has not designed us to need anything from another human being in order for us to be healed. And when I say anything, I mean anything. They don't need to talk to you. You don't need to ever talk with anyone about what's going on with you except for God. You just need to understand your personal accountability, and you need to understand that God is your healer, and you need to believe that, and you need to go to him. I've explained to you in other videos the development model that I use with people when I'm trying to help them understand how God has designed them and what is required of them. What I want you to do is I want you to take your hands and I want you to put them flat against each other. You know, in the past, I called these prayer hands till I realized that those flat against each other prayer hands are actually pagan. Those are prayer hands that they use in the occult, so I'm sorry. I don't want to call them that, but that's essentially what you're doing right now, and not for the purpose of prayer or yoga or anything else. Place them right, in the center of your chest. And as you begin to bring them up, I want you to separate them into a, sort of a Y position, as though you're like, and think about that as something that is blossoming, something that is developing. Now bring them back to your chest. This here in front of your chest represents dependence. You are dependent at only one time in your life. One time in your life. When you're born, when you're an infant, you are fully dependent on someone else to take care of every need that you have. You cannot clean yourself. You cannot feed yourself. You cannot soothe yourself when you're in pain. You don't even know how to identify your needs yet. And by the way that your parent is identifying your needs, you come to understand how to identify your needs and then therefore meet your needs. And so if you have a parent who neglects you, you won't know how to identify or meet your needs. So you need someone to look at you. You need them to see you, to know you, and to respond to you. See you, know you, respond to you. If you've ever been around a baby and that baby starts crying, you've got to look at them, you've got to listen, and a parent learns to attune themselves to their child. They learn to know, she's wet. Oh, she's in pain. I can tell by this, she's kind of swollen in the face, and, that certain cry, I know what that is. They learn to attune themselves to the cry of their child, to the temperament of their child, any changes in their demeanor. And a parent who is attuned is going to know their child. And they're going to know them because they're first observing them. They're first seeing them. They're first listening to them. And now they know them. Over time, they come to know this is a wet cry, this is a hungry cry, this is a pain cry. They might even come to know whether their child is really smiling or they're passing gas, right? We come to know those things too. I want you to remember that. See them, know them, respond. Because that is now your responsibility. And you know what? A lot of us didn't get that when we were growing up. We were neglected. Our parents were preoccupied. This next generation coming up, think about that. You got a parent nursing their child or feeding their child, and they're on constant technology. They don't look at their child. They're not, engaging with them. Totally preoccupied. Both parents are working. They don't know their children. How will their children ever know themselves? And this is a problem that's been happening from generation to generation to generation, and it has contributed to the increase in wickedness. Now take those hands and begin to separate them. Now you can drop your hands. I'm sorry if you're still holding your hands up. But as you separate them and you raise them over your head, you have this fully blossomed, spiritually healthy adult. And along the way, as you were separating your hands, that blossom was developing, wasn't it? And so you're beginning to develop ways of taking care of yourself. As you become a toddler, you start to say things like, I'll do it, I can do it by myself, right? That's what we hear a toddler doing. And so we begin to see development change from being totally dependent on the parent, even though they need the parent, and they're going to run away, they're going to go play with their friends, but they're going to look back because they want to make sure that mom or dad is still there. They still very much need you, but they're starting to develop independence developmentally. They know how to brush their teeth. They know how to feed themselves. They go potty by themselves. They pick out their clothes. They're developing the ability to do certain things for themselves. And you'll even see that they're developing the ability to soothe themselves. So they might do certain things in order to soothe themselves. Some things that are good and some things that are not good habits. And you're going to see a child who's feeling emotionally neglected, picking up on some bad habits, biting their nails, sucking their thumb, and even acting out on other children in order to regulate themselves. Or because they're feeling so dysregulated, it's going to start coming out of them. As you continue on in this development until you are fully developed, you're going to develop more and more abilities to take care of yourself. And the ways in which you were taken care of are going to be the ways in which you are going to take care of yourself unless something changes. And you need to hear that. Nothing changes if nothing changes in you. If you experienced abusive, neglectful, harmful situations in your life, particularly coming from those who you were supposed to be able to trust, who God entrusted to raise his child, and that has now become the way that you treat yourself. It will also, by the way, become the way that you treat others, whether you acknowledge that or not. And you're going to have a tendency to repeat the things that were done to you. You're going to repeat them within yourself, and you're also going to repeat those situations in relationships. This is what I tell you is the compulsion to repeat. I didn't make it up. Alice Miller observed it. And then she, of course, as science does, came up with her own story about why it happens. Her story about why it happens is that the brain has a need to make sense of experiences that it has, that you've had. And I think, that was probably a fairly good explanation. I think Alice Miller did a fairly good job. The problem is she did not explain things based on God. Here's the truth, because the truth is the only thing that matters. It's not your brain that has a need for that. If God put that capacity in you, or he put that need inside of you, that you have a need to understand why you went through certain things, what you need to understand is that that need has a purpose. He has a purpose in establishing that need. So whether it's your brain, whether it's your soul, whatever it is, he has a purpose, and that's the reason it matters. Otherwise, you'll go and do things like electroconvulsive therapy to obliterate the need that your brain has to make sense of things like that. Well, I'll control this nuisance of my brain needing to make sense of this because this is too painful. You'll take medications. You'll act out your situations in other relationships, thinking that you're somehow going to resolve this trauma that needs to be resolved. Unresolved issues, unresolved suffering, that is all trauma is. It is unresolved suffering. Now, let me tell you the reason you need to resolve it. Because God sent it. Because God is sovereign. Because he has a purpose in sending certain experiences in your life, painful or otherwise, usually painful, in order to build you. And you are going to be built for his purpose if you're going to fulfill this covenant. And if you're rejecting that, you're going to experience consequences. And those consequences are going to turn into spirits if you keep spurning and rejecting his will. And those spirits are going to compel you to act out the trauma and act out the trauma and act out the trauma and to rehash it, which is another way of acting it out. So I want you to know, some of you who contact me and want to tell me about your trauma over and over and over and over, the same story and nothing's changing, I won't engage with it. The first time I'll tell you to fast and return to him. And I'll lead you back to Heart Known series. But after that, I won't engage anymore. And you need not say that this is your testimony. Your testimony is what God builds in you. Your testimony is not rehashing and using me as a sounding board to vent your spirit. Proverbs 29:11 says, a fool gives vent to spirit. Please do not think that that's going to heal you. Please do not use me to validate you, because I am really clear in my agreement with God that I do not set myself up as an idol, and I will not sit here and validate you all the way to hell. That design that God gave you to be dependent when you were born, but to separate into those two hands that end up in this fully blossomed, spiritually healthy human being. On one hand, he gave you relationship with him. And on the other hand, he gave you personal accountability to soothe yourself, to process through your feelings, to understand your feelings, to relate with yourself and talk yourself through, to remind yourself of his word in faith and commitment to his word. And on the other hand, relationship with God. When you continue to live in this dependent way, what you are doing is you are trying to engage God in a codependent relationship. You feel panicked and desperate, and so you go to him in your flesh, and you're not doing the work that you're supposed to be doing in personal accountability. And he doesn't respond. And the reason he doesn't respond is because you're not bringing yourself into the correct posture to enter his presence. He will not respond to you going to him in your flesh. The other thing that you do when you are dependent, when you have not recognized the design that he has given you for personal accountability, is you start doing that with other human beings. You start requiring them to fix this for you, to be your sounding board. And you rehash, and you rehash, and you rehash. And it never leads to healing. And you're also setting up a stumbling block for other people to engage in gossip with you. That is not something I will do. I am not here to validate you through judgment towards others. And the interesting thing is, usually the people who are doing that are the very ones saying not to judge other people. And what they're doing is gossiping over and over, They like to point the finger at all of the false teachers and the false ministries and the hypocrites and the Pharisees, but they haven't taken the plank out of their own eye. And so there's no healing. And much of the time, what bothers them so much about other people is what's going on in themselves, what they're actually doing. A good example of this is constantly talking about the hypocrisy of the Pharisees. Oh, they set themselves up in this way and that. You're not called to be focused on them. Jesus was not focused on them. Jesus was focused on teaching the people not to become like them, but it wasn't his primary focus. He didn't go chasing after these people. He wasn't rehashing these things. His focus was on truth that comes from God. So if you're finding that you're stuck on something, there's a reason. There's something that God is calling you in to address in yourself. And the reason I bring this example up is because there are a lot of people who come out of counterfeit Christianity and they're really angry about the false teachers out there who deceived them. They think that they were deceived by those false teachers. You know what the word says? You were deceived by what was in your heart. God hands you over to delusion when you have not loved truth. My people perish for lack of knowledge, not because it's not accessible, but because they reject it. They reject it. If you were deceived, stop blaming that pastor. Stop blaming that church and start taking responsibility for what's going on in your heart. If healing is contingent on others, you are in big trouble. And it just so happens that if your parents did you wrong, and then they realized that they did you wrong, and they came back and they said, you know what? We realized we did you wrong. We're going to do everything we can to parent you. And you're however many years old now, a grown adult, there is no way to go back into that developmental period. It has come and gone, and you need to grieve that. And you need to recognize that this is God's will and that he is doing something. That all of those things that you experienced are not in vain as long as you return to him. That you will not be able to act out or have a redo of the things that have been painful in your life. Those parents that want to do good by you now, they can't heal you. Partner that you married, they can't heal you either. Because remember the developmental model that I showed you. You start out dependent, and that dependence must blossom into relationship with God and personal accountability. That is the reason why I teach you the model that I teach you in Heart Known series. Because I am teaching you a way to examine your feelings and examine your heart and the design that God has given you so that you can integrate the experiences that you've had in your life, not purge them. You need to integrate them. You need to return to God and you need to understand why. Why did you go through this? You need to examine your own feelings so that you can understand how to relate with the design that he's given you. You need to see your inner child, know them, and respond to them because it's no one else's responsibility to take care of you. And God does not engage you in a codependent relationship. That is not our covenant, and it is not the relationship we have with him. He will not respond. You absolutely must do what you are responsible for doing, and he will do what he is responsible for doing in this covenant. If you do it any other way, he will not respond. You're not going to hear him, and you're not going to heal. There is no other path to healing. I want to tell you that emphatically. I got a big old doctorate in that, and it was worth nothing. There is no other path to healing. He is the only way, the only truth, the only life. And it just so happens that he uses the word healing synonymously with salvation. So do you think that he might have established healing in such a way that it would help you to understand your covenant for salvation? Well, yeah. There's personal responsibility in your healing. There's personal responsibility in your relationship with him. And there's personal responsibility in your covenant with him. You cannot relent it away. You cannot purge it away. God says, look inward. He says, plank, speck. If you remove the plank from your own eye, you'll be able to help your brother remove the speck from his. If you are doing this work and you are repenting, removing the plank from your eye, he will restore you that you will serve him. If you speak worthy, not worthless words, he will make you his spokesman. But if you just stand in judgment, gossiping all day and setting yourself up on a pedestal or going from one idol to the next or blaming everyone else for your problems, you will never heal and you will never understand and you will never be activated in the purpose for which God set you apart. Do you think that he has extended that lampstand to you, that purpose? has given you all of these experiences in your life that you keep spurning him with, that you keep setting yourself up as though you're better than everyone else, casting judgment on them, but not removing that plank from your eye, how can you keep that lampstand if you refuse to let him build it? You won't keep it. And all of those experiences, those painful experiences you have in your life that God intends to do something beautiful with, that he intends to not only save you, but save others through you, all of those things he has sent will be in vain. In vain. Because you refuse to let him build you. You refuse to take responsibility for why you ended up in situations like that, even unknowingly, even ignorantly. Does he not say that he will lash you with a smaller lashing if you sinned ignorantly, but if you sin with knowledge, he will give you a bigger lashing? Why? Because he's doing something. He's teaching you. He's building you for his purpose. He's the potter. You're the clay, remember? I've given you a way to do this in Heart Known series. You got a better way? Do that. I don't have a problem with it. I don't have any skin in the game. But you need not say that you don't know how to do this, or continue to act like someone else needs to do it for you, or continue to get in idolatrous relationships where you're acting this out and then you end up hurt because that's not your design, nor is it anyone else's design to take care of your feelings. The traumas, the experiences that God is giving you in your life need to be resolved. They need to be resolved not because your brain has a need for it, but because God has a purpose in it. If this feels like a harsh message, it's not because I intend any evil towards you or because I intend to hurt you. It is because people are not hearing it, and you need to hear it. You need to know that this is your responsibility, not just your responsibility so that you feel better, but it's your responsibility in your covenant. God is not going to make you comfortable at the expense of your salvation. I have shared many experiences that I have had on this channel. I've shared them with you with regard to my childhood, with regard to people that I come across on the channel, these kinds of things. Never am I sharing them to gossip with you. I'm always sharing them for a purpose, and I never share them to process them on you, to set myself up as better than anybody else. In fact, the majority of the experiences that I share with you on this channel have to do with my sin, the mistakes that I made, and the ways that God is dealing with me so that you can learn. So as far as others are concerned, any story that I'm sharing with you is for his glory. He's using it, but he wouldn't use it and he wouldn't testify to it if I wasn't doing the work. He's going to use your testimony, but only when you have one. And I want to be really careful because someone did say something to me the other day about testimony, claiming that something that they were sharing with me was their testimony. Let me tell you what the definition of testimony is. Your testimony is what God is building in you. Your testimony is not just what you heard from man or what you experienced in a situation. Your testimony is what God is building in you. If I drive down the street and I go to the stop sign at the end of the street and I say, here's what I did. I drove down the street, got in my car, drove down the street, stopped at the stop sign. That's my testimony. That's not the testimony God is talking about in the Word, guys. The testimony that you're going to share is what you've experienced with Jesus Christ. It's not what you heard in some man. If you're listening to me and you go and tell someone, here's what I heard from Carrie, here's my testimony. No, you just heard that from Carrie. But if God testifies to what Carrie said, then you can say, I testify to this. This is my testimony because the Holy Spirit convicted me that this is true. That's not the way that person was using it. In fact, we were talking about a false prophet, and there's no way that God testified to that. So you need to understand what a testimony is. God intends to build you, and he intends to do it personally, and he has set you apart for a very specific purpose. And all those things that you want to erase from your life, all those traumas that you want to like stuff away, throw them in the closet so they don't see the light of day, he's using that. He sent that. He intends for you to be built by it. And your life is going to get very difficult until you actually pull that out of the closet and start examining it. Please know that. Please understand that. And it's going to lead to all kinds of sin. It's going to lead to you exalting yourself over the people who you feel hurt by in your life. Gossip, reenactment, a spirit of fear, trying to control by the work of your hands, confusion. Because frankly, if you're not healing and you're trying to enact some ministry and you're setting yourself up to go and teach other people or do these things, but your own house is not in order, the people who actually do this work, first of all, are going to know. They're going to see that. You're not fooling anyone. The most important thing is that God sees it. He sees what you're doing. Do you think that you please him by going out and teaching things that you're not receiving from him? By setting yourself up in a particular way when you're not bearing the fruit of healing? You need to get right with God first. The order of operation is this: repent and I will restore you. Repent and I will restore you. That means repent and I will heal you. Return to me and I will heal you. If you utter worthy words, not worthless words, okay? If you stand in the authority he's given you, uttering worthy words, not worthless words, no postulations, no I think this, I think that, speaking on his authority, not the authority of your thoughts. If you utter worthy words, not worthless words, I will make you my spokesman. Let this people turn to you. You must not turn to them. That means no false prophets. It means no false teachers. It means if you've fallen into that, you need to examine yourself. Stop blaming everyone else. And I want you to know you're not alone. We've all learned from false teachers and false prophets. Every single one of us has been deceived. No one's unique on here. Well, except for my friend who's named Unique. But even Unique is not unique in the sense of what God is doing and the deceptions that we've faced. All of us have to face the deceptions that we believed. All of us have to examine our hearts. All of us are being pulled out of Babylon. It's not just a few. It's all of us. He says, come out of her, my people, not come out of her, some of you. We've all been deceived. One cult is not different from another cult. A cult is a cult. And we're living in one gigantic cult. If your healing is contingent on other people, you are in big trouble. If your healing is contingent on churches getting it together, oh, God help you. If your healing is contingent on your spouses getting it together, you're in big trouble. And in fact, you not realize that the word says that if you are the believing spouse, you fancy yourself the believing spouse, you might just save them. How are you going to do that? By the work of your hands or by healing yourself? Because you ended up in that relationship. So there's something going on in you. And that thing needs to be healed in order for your relationship, your half of that relationship, to start healing. When your part of the relationship starts healing, it's going to affect the whole relationship. You know why? Because God said he brought it together. He brought you together as one flesh. You can't affect just one isolated part of the body. What you do in one part of the body is going to affect the entire body. And when that's healed, it's going to affect your children. Please heed my words. I don't say them to hurt you, but I do say them to shake you up and get you to see that your healing is not contingent on anybody else. And thank God for that. And I know that a lot of people think that, I didn't do this. I didn't do this stuff to myself when I was a kid. It wasn't my fault, so it's not my job to heal it. It's not my job to do any kind of work. They need to come back and fix this. They need to acknowledge, well, my parents are dead, and I want to tell you that I've healed. God has healed me, and he has taught me how to be the mother that I didn't have, and he is a father to the fatherless, and he has helped me to put my house in order. And he is the one who activated me in the purpose for which I'm set apart, not me. And my wisdom does not come from me or my ideas and postulations. And that is the order he's going to do it. Thank you for listening. God bless you. And I'll see you in the next video.